On August 22, 1862, President Abraham Lincoln wrote a letter to New York Tribune editor Horace Greeley, and it was in response to a letter that Greeley had addressed to the president just days before and had published in the Tribune. Greeley's letter was entitled A Prayer for 20 Millions, and basically it criticizes Lincoln for failing to uphold certain provisions of the Second Confiscation Act, of failing to, quote, execute the laws, end quote, and in general failing to fulfill the promises upon which he'd been elected. So I think we need to look at Greeley's letter before we can examine Lincoln's response. He says, "Dear Sir, I do not intrude to tell you, for you must already know, that a great proportion of those who triumphed in your election, and of all who desire the unqualified suppression of the rebellion now desolating the country, are sorely disappointed and deeply pained by the policy you seem to be pursuing with regard to the slaves of the rebels. I write only to set succinctly and unmistakably before you what we require, what we think we have a right to expect, and of what we complain." Now, based on the title of this letter, as well as Greeley's opening lines, it's clear that he felt he was speaking for the vast majority of the Northern population who had elected Lincoln due to his anti-slavery views, and that they were, across the board, clearly very disappointed in his failure to act more decisively. He goes on to say, "We think you strangely and disastrously remiss in the discharge of your official and imperative duty with regard to the emancipating provisions of the new Confiscation Act. Why these traitors should be treated with tenderness by you, to the prejudice of the dearest rights of loyal men, we cannot conceive." Greeley then, the letter goes on, he launches into a series of arguments in which he basically infers that Lincoln's delay with regards to the Confiscation Act show a broader pattern of reluctance with regard to emancipation. Lincoln's response to Greeley was published in the National Intelligencer on August 22, 1862. He says, "Dear Sir, I have just read yours of the 19th, addressed to myself through the New York Tribune." Now, I think we really get a sense of some of Lincoln's personality here, because there's very clearly a tone of anger as well as sarcasm, beginning with the fact that he's angry that this so-called private letter was actually addressed to the public and published in the Tribune. He goes on to say, "If there be in it any statements or assumptions of fact that I know to be erroneous, I do not now and here controvert them. If there be in it any inferences which I believe to be falsely drawn, I do not now and here argue against them. If there be perceptible in it an impatient and dictatorial tone, I waive it in deference to an old friend." So with that phrasing, "if there be in it," Lincoln is clearly and sarcastically inferring that obviously there are errors of fact, of assumption, and that there is a dictatorial tone to Greeley's letter. Lincoln says, "As to the policy I seem to be pursuing, as you say, I have not meant to leave anyone in doubt. I would save the Union. I would save it the shortest way under the Constitution. The sooner the national authority can be restored, the nearer the Union will be the Union as it was." Now, when he refers to the Union as it was in quotation marks, he may be referring to a slogan used by the Peace Democrats to restore the Union as it was. The Peace Democrats, or Copperheads, whose aim it was to negotiate an end to the war and restore the Union through compromise. However, there may be an additional underlying message to this phrasing, the Union as it was. It's not going to be the Union as it was, and Lincoln knows this. Historian James Oakes calls Lincoln's letter to Greeley a masterpiece of indirect revelation. Lincoln knows something that the public does not know, which is that he has already drafted the Emancipation Proclamation, and it is merely sitting in his desk waiting for a Union military victory to make the timing for the announcement of the proclamation right. So I think if we look at the remainder of Lincoln's letter with Oakes' assessment that this is a masterpiece of indirect revelation in mind, it really dramatically changes the way that this letter is interpreted. Lincoln says, "If there be those who would not save the Union unless they could at the same time save slavery, I do not agree with them. If there be those who would not save the Union unless they could at the same time destroy slavery, I do not agree with them. My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and it's not either to save or to destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. If I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do that. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that." Well, this very famous passage has frequently been interpreted to show that Lincoln's one true commitment was to saving the Union, and that the emancipation of slaves was of lesser importance, may even have been merely born out of military necessity. Now, I think when Lincoln says that saving the Union is his paramount object, we can take him at his word. But we need to remember that paramount does not mean sole. It means foremost. It was certainly his foremost goal, but that does not mean that emancipating slaves was not also a key goal. I think it's important to point out, if we look at the wording, if I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. That's not even a possibility at this point, because slavery has already been abolished in the territories. It's been abolished in Washington, D.C. It's been abolished in certain parts of the occupied South. So that possibility is past. He goes on to say, "What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps to save the Union. And what I forbear because I do not believe it would help to save the Union. I shall do less whenever I shall believe that what I am doing hurts the cause, and I shall do more whenever I shall believe doing more will help the cause. I shall try to correct errors when shown to be errors, and I shall adopt new views so fast as they shall appear to be true views." Again, if we look at this letter in the context of indirect revelation, and we look at the wording in that passage, we see that Lincoln is carefully revealing that there is a major policy change coming, emancipation. And he's laying the groundwork for winning over public opinion for that policy change. And he really seems to be speaking to two different groups here in this letter. One, by saying that saving the Union is his paramount object, he is, on the one hand, reassuring those in the public who do not want to see this war turned into a war of liberation. But at the same time, he is clearly intimating to anti-slavery men that a change in policy is coming. Lincoln was always a master of public relations, and never more skillfully than in this letter. By framing the Emancipation Proclamation as a Union-saving measure, he is working to win over the conservatives and the skeptics. He ends by saying, "I have here stated my purpose according to my view of official duty, and I intend no modification of my oft expressed personal wish that all men everywhere could be free." And in this last sentence, he's revealing the tension between his interpretation of his official role and his personal views, and how he's always been forced to juggle those two views. Lincoln did not believe that he could constitutionally wage a war to end slavery, but he did believe that he could constitutionally emancipate slaves in order to restore the Union as part of his capacity as Commander-in-Chief. And that's precisely what he will do when he announces the Emancipation Proclamation just a month later on September 22nd, 1862.